Great, well, welcome everybody. Yes, my name is Steve Bolton. I'm a project officer with Butterfly Conservation, and I'm going to be talking to you about the Brilliant Butterflies project. It's a 2-year project funded by the People's Postcode Lottery. It's led by London Wildlife Trust in partnership with Butterfly Conservation and Natural History Museum. So we're going to cover these different things in today's webinar. A little bit just for those of you who don't know about Butterfly Conservation, then where the project began, some of the inspiration behind the project, a project overview, the things we're looking to achieve, the aims and objectives. It's a kind of a project about chalk grassland, so explaining a bit about chalk grass and the importance of chalk grassland. How we're getting on so far, the story so far in the project, and what our plans are for the future. So who are Butterfly Conservation? Well, we're a UK-wide charity founded in 1968. We've got over 40,000 members and 80 members of staff. Our mission is the conservation of butterflies, moths, and our environment. And some of the key aspects of our work are listed there, taking practical conservation action. We've got a fairly remarkable 73, or involved in 73 different landscape scale conservation projects across the UK. We promote scientific study, including a number of different scientific papers published by our science department. We safeguard important sites, so we've got 36 different nature reserves across the country, where we promote conservation of butterflies and moths and other wildlife. We encourage public enjoyment of butterflies and moths with various education programs, and one of the key great things about butterfly conservation is the thousands of volunteers actually across the country that submit data through various monitoring and recording butterfly schemes and moths to help build up that picture of the health of our environment and the butterfly and moth populations in the UK. So this is just a short video of kind of the inspiration behind the project. The video should play okay, but if it doesn't, not to worry, it's only short, and we've got some links there, and you can watch it after the presentation. And this chap here is Matthew Frith, the Director of Conservation at London Wildlife Trust.
Brilliant Butterfly Banks is an incredibly innovative project that we're very excited about as a partnership. It brings together practical nature conservation, looking to improve areas of existing nature reserve in chalk grassland areas in South Croydon, with some new habitat creation in local communities to build these brilliant butterfly banks very close to the doorsteps of people that live nearby.
Once you know something, you're more likely to care about it. One of our long-term ambitions of Wildlife Trust and through our partnership with Butterfly Conservation and Natural History Museum is we're all working together to get people to better understand and care for the nature on their doorstep. And if they can take care and understanding for the nature on the doorstep, then we will have a biodiversity for generations to come.
There's not been this large-scale, landscape-scale project in London before, specifically working with chalk grassland. It's a very rare habitat in Britain. It's going to be groundbreaking research that's done on this site.
Well, this is a book I wrote when I was 7 years old, and it is of the butterflies that I was absolutely fascinated with. And there were lots of butterflies in those spaces around then. As I grew up into my 20s and 30s, the butterfly numbers have dropped. The spaces in which I used to walk around have either disappeared or completely scrubbed over. To bring back that diversity of butterflies when I was a 7-year-old into the spaces which I grew up around is a dream come true.
Right, well, hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour of the kind of inspiration behind the project and the sort of partners that are involved. And this next slide is actually, again, just setting the scene, and it's a quote from On the Origin of Species from Charles Darwin, and it talks about the kind of complexity of life on some chalk downland habitat just near his home in the village of Down. And this picture and the image behind is actually a chalk grassland bank just adjacent to Down House, which is currently managed by English Heritage, and the chalk grassland bank itself is part of West Kent Golf Course, and it's managed by London Wildlife Trust. And that in itself is some fantastic habitat, but it kind of illustrates within London itself, the kind of pressures of urbanisation within London, and the need for people to be better connected with nature, and to get better connected with nature on their doorstep. And that's something that we're looking to bring together, this partnership with London Wildlife Trust, Butterfly Conservation and Natural History Museum to kind of address some of these issues. So just a bit of a project overview, some of the key parts we're looking to deliver as part of the project. We're looking to restore around 44 hectares of chalk grassland across 6 London Wildlife Trust nature reserves, looking to boost biodiversity on those sites. We're looking to create up to 40 new habitats in green spaces across the project area, again to help expand declining insect populations. We're looking to develop and deliver a social butterflies engagement program, all different range of different events, nature-based events of all different ages and abilities. We're looking to get lots of volunteers involved and be training citizen scientists to get involved in surveying chalk grassland and butterflies and moths. We're also looking to do some surveying using environmental DNA techniques, and that's what the Natural History Museum are getting involved in, to build up a more detailed kind of understanding of the different species within these ecosystems. We're looking to engage around 4,400 people as part of the project with that variety of activities and engagement across the project area. So what's so special about chalk grassland? Well, it's a rare and declining habitat. It's declined by about 80% since 1945. And this is partly due to urbanisation and intensive agriculture. And it's a very rich habitat in terms of biodiversity. So it's something that we're looking to reverse the decline of and restore and create more chalk grassland habitat within the project area. And just to give you a bit of a flavour of the kind of chalk landscape and what makes it so special, we've got this little animation just to give you a flavour of that. And it's really the conditions of a very thin layer of nutrient poor topsoil on the chalk bedrock, and it's very free draining as well. Water runs off very quickly and the soil heats up. And those stress conditions prevent coarse grass species from taking over and give rise to a very rich plant community where you can have up to 40 different plant species in 1 square metre. And that in itself gives rise to thousands of different invertebrate species which feed on those different plant species and provide shelter. So many different types of aphids, grasshoppers, bugs, beetles, butterflies and bees. So it really is a very rich habitat, and we're looking to create a kind of chalk grass and living landscape across that project area. And just a bit on sort of how we manage chalk grassland. It does need cutting and clearing just to prevent scrub invading and kind of taking over. So one of the best ways of doing that, we've got our friends from Sean the sheep here to help us with the grazing that helps keep the grass low and sort of maintain the habitat. But there are different ways of maintaining the habitat, and you can use cattle as well, for example. And actually just behind the, I'll just move that over. We also actually, scrub is an important part of the habitat. It's not just open grassland, because the scrub and these are sort of low shrubs form an important part of the habitat. So on the right hand side of the screen, just under the thumbnails, little animations come in just to illustrate that actually scrub plays an important part of the habitat. But where we do get scrub invading some of the grassland areas, we can restore in a number of different ways, and one of those is to actually scrape the topsoil. The more nutrient-rich topsoil can be scraped off to reveal the lower nutrient subsoil beneath, and that can then be seeded, and we can restore sort of chalk grassland areas in that way. And that doesn't necessarily need to be done over a large area, but if we do a smaller scrape and establish a good diversity of plants in that area, those will then seed into the wider grassland as well, so we can restore a wider area and try and maintain biodiversity in that way. And just to give you a bit of a species snapshot of some of the different species that we're looking to target, the small blue, for example, butterfly is a nationally rare species that's declined by around 44% over the last 40 years. But thankfully in Surrey, numbers are increasing thanks to some recent conservation projects. But it is a habitat specialist species. And one of the reasons for that is that it only lays its eggs on the kidney vetch plant, which is the plant shown in the picture there, and the caterpillar will only feed on the kidney vetch plant. And you tend to find these plants on chalk grassland sites, and Hutchinson's Bank, which is one of the London Wildlife Trust sites in Croydon, is actually one of the best sites in the country for small blue butterfly. And by creating new habitats around that site and across the project area, then we will encourage and allow that butterfly to expand into green spaces where it's currently absent. Another one is the dark green paturi butterfly. Again, it's a habitat specialist butterfly that lays its eggs on the common dog violets. I'm showing the picture there. This species is doing very well at a site called Chapel Bank, which is just nearby Hutchinson's Bank in Croydon. And there's some quite significant restoration work going on that particular site, with some scrapes, removing invasive scrub and restoring chalk grassland in that way. The marble white butterfly is more of a widespread countryside species, so it's not quite so fussy as the other two, and it lays its eggs on a number of different grass species, and then the flower here is shown as the knapweed, which is a very favoured nectar feeding plant. So we're looking to actually provide habitat that's going to support both the rarer habitat specialist species and the more common widespread species, but all species are generally on the decline. So actually the more widespread species often need just as much support and new habitat as the rarer species do. So just where we've got to in the project to date, in terms of the story so far. So the project was launched in September 2019 at Hutchinson's Bank, and with the mayor there you can see in this image, and this is some of the staff members and some of the support staff. So there's 5 members of staff from London Wildlife Trust, and there's me from Butterfly Conservation and another member of staff from the Natural History Museum. So this image, if you can see the project area in the top right of your screen, shows a kind of wider view with London shown at the top, and then the project area in red stretching across South Croydon and Bromley. And then in the main map image, you can see the 6 kind of core London Wildlife Trust nature reserves in green, and this is the sites that London Wildlife Trust manage and have been looking after for some time, but we've now got this sort of cash injection to restore and make sure those sites are as good as they can be for biodiversity. And then from those sites we can expand that biodiversity potential and opportunity into surrounding countryside and green spaces, particularly working with local landowners like Croydon and Bromley Council. And there are some sort of indicative areas for work shown in yellow, but those have been since been greatly expanded to try and sort of connect up these areas of habitat. So, for example, this is Sanderstead here, and we're working with the Friends of Sanderstead Recreation Ground on their site in this location to create some butterfly banks and new habitats that the community then involved in and invested in. They help us seed and plant the banks, and we would expect butterflies to start colonising that bank within the next few years. In addition to sort of sites here, we're then looking to be working in Selsdon as well, in this area here at Selsdon Wood, So we've got a network of sites across the project area to really boost those numbers of butterflies and allow them to expand. So my sort of primary role is around the habitat creation side of things and working with different landowners and community groups. So I thought I'd just give you a bit of detail on the kind of principles that we're working with, so that helps you understand how we're generating these new habitats. So one of the key principles to be aware of is that our best grasslands develop on the poorest soils, so nutrient poor soils, as shown on this slope, is a very nutrient poor soil and giving rise to lots of different wildflowers. And just to illustrate that, this is a quick photo with on the left. This is a verge, a grassland verge in Dorset, where topsoil has been added to this site, and you can see how vigorous the grass growth is and relatively low in diversity. Whereas the image on the right is a similar bit of verge, literally 100 meters down the road, where they'd actually run out of topsoil. And so it was just some natural seeding onto the exposed subsoil. And you can see the grass growth is much less vigorous. There's finer grasses in there and more wildflowers. So it's that sort of principle of working with lower nutrient soils that's key to establishing longer term areas of wildflowers, which actually need much less management, because you can see there's less vigorous growth. And there is a good news bit of this story in that we've been working with national bodies like Highways England, and Highways England have now formally adopted this kind of approach on any new road developments to not actually add any topsoil and restore these sites with subsoil, and that will give rise to much greater biodiversity, which is fantastic news. So new habitat is designed with low fertility soils, as I've kind of explained, and so there are a number of different ways of doing that, and the first one here I'm showing is using existing subsoil. So the top image is taken at Hutchinson's Bank Nature Reserve, where the higher nutrient topsoil layer was scraped off to expose the subsoil beneath, which was then seeded. And then a few years later, you can see in the bottom image the abundance of wildflowers. Certainly kidney vetch is a kind of pioneer species which does particularly well in these scrapes, and you can seed it, and it will almost certainly appear within 1 or 2 years. On the back of that, on existing sites, small blue will colonise. On other sites, it may take a little bit longer, but they will find these sites where kidney vetch is being introduced. So another method we've used in terms of habitat creation is importing suitable low fertility material. So this top image is from Burgess Park, where sort of sandy gravel was introduced and then seeded to establish in wildflower areas. And I'm sure that was a year or so ago, so I'm sure that will be more established now and beginning to bear fruit with lots of wildflowers. And the one below is a imported chalk bank from St Albans in Hertfordshire, again to support the small blue, and that would have been seeded with a variety of different species and kidney vetch as well. The third method is more a kind of adaptation of mowing regimes to kind of reduce soil nutrient levels and encourage wildflowers. And this photo kind of illustrates that with, on the left-hand side, the long, thick vegetation is just topped or cut sort of once a year, and the cuttings are left on the verge, whereas on the right-hand side, the verge, this is in Dorset, by the way, went through a 1-year process of restoration where, rather than any cuttings being left on the verge, they were cut and collected, hence the name cut and collect mowing. And if you can do that, let it grow long and cut it, and do that 3 times in a year, you reduce the nutrient levels, and then the following year, you should find more of a habitat appearing like this, with fine grasses that's more open and has more wildflowers. So as part of the project, we're talking to different councils, different landowners, how they manage their verges and amenity grasslands. So you don't necessarily need to bring the diggers in, you can just change your mowing regime to encourage biodiversity and potentially save money in the longer term, because you're actually reducing the number of cuts you need to do. So this is just another quick illustration of that approach of just changing the mowing regime. So this was amenity grassland that was cut very short regularly, and it went through a process of restoration. And now you've got abundant wildflowers, but you know, in some of those amenity and community areas, you can keep it sort of relatively neat and tidy with a shorter sort of border around the edge. So another key part of our work is engaging the local community in this process. From the very outset, from where banks might be located and do they have any areas that we're interested in working on, through to helping us propagate from wildflowers from seed and planting out some of the plants on different banks and different community spaces. So this is a picture on Riddlesdown Common and a sort of bank or bund around the car park that they very helpfully created in a sort of lovely chalky, low nutrient subsoil that was ideal for seeding and planting into. So this is just an illustration of some habitat creation in the butterfly bank we did using existing subsoil. And this is actually taken from Fairchild's primary school in New Addington, who are very interested in having a sort of butterfly bank within their grounds. And this site is almost immediately adjacent to the Hutchinson's Bank Nature Reserve. So it's sort of creating that habitat in those nearby spaces. So this method was done by removing turf initially, and then a topsoil layer to form the base of the bank, which was then basically covered in subsoil from the site. So we didn't need to bring any other material in. We were just using subsoils from the site. So we ended up with a subsoil bank of sufficient depth to make sure it was appropriate and low nutrient subsoil. And then a flat area of subsoil in front of the bank. And the idea of creating a bank is that ideally it's kind of south facing, but has a number of different aspects to it in a sort of curved bank. So you get a variety of microclimate conditions and hotspots for different butterfly species and different breeding conditions for different butterfly species. And so that was quite fun, getting out there with the diggers and building butterfly banks, but then also great fun getting the kids involved. And so we had three groups, three classes of about 20 or 30 kids come out over the course of the day to help us with the seeding and the planting. So we have a kind of chalk grass and seed mix that we use, which has about 25 or so wildflower species, about 7 or so grass species. And then we supplement that seeding with plug plantings of some of the key food plants and nectar plants, like birdsfoot trefoil, for example, kidney vetch, marjoram, knapweed, field scabious, so that we've got some almost instant little plants to get established in the bank. And it's just a great way of getting the sort of community involved as well. Yeah. So this is a soil inversion habitat creation, and this was taken at Higher Drive Recreation Ground in Purley, so it's a Croydon kind of council site, and it's in a sort of prominent position nearby a kind of play area, but effectively just creating a wildflower bed, in a sort of green space. And there's acres of this sort of amenity grassland, and yes, you need to leave space for recreation, but it's great that we can establish some of these wildflower areas. So this method is where we remove the topsoil first. We then also excavate the subsoil and then put back the topsoil at the kind of bottom of the hole, if you like, and then put the subsoil on top. So it is this soil inversion where on the bottom left there, you end up with the subsoil on the surface that is then suitable for seeding and planting, and means you will get that long-term establishment of wildflowers and grasses without the kind of coarse grasses invading. This particular one is level and flat. There's no bank there, and that's partly down to the fact that we wanted to just make it a bit easier to maintain, and so it can actually be mown. Although you wouldn't mow it, you'd only mow it once a year. It could be mown at the same time as the surrounding grassland. And then, as I talked about in terms of engagement on the bottom left there, we're working with the local Friends of group who've been very supportive, and they came out for the day to help us do some plug planting, and they will also help with the ongoing maintenance and monitoring of the site. So another kind of bank, or what was is more of the simplest version, if you like, is a scrape, which you may have heard of previously. And as the name suggests, we're literally just taking off or scraping off the topsoil to expose the subsoil underneath. And again, you can seed and plant directly into the subsoil. And this is taken at a place called Falconwood Meadow in New Addington. And we're looking to enhance the site here. Although it's already got some meadow plants and wildflowers in it, it's quite relatively low in diversity and didn't support that many butterfly species. So by creating these areas, we can introduce some more diversity of plants and chalk grass and species. And then we know we've got the chalk grass and nature reserves nearby. And so the butterflies should then colonise these nearby spaces. And the bottom picture is actually just to kind of illustrate that you don't necessarily need lots of machinery or diggers. And this was just I think it was a Sussex Wildlife Trust member that decided he wanted to create some wildflower habitat in his front garden. And again, it's similar principles. So you can see a turf stripper there. So we removed the turf just enough to get that top layer off, then sort of dug over the ground, the soil, and then seeded it with wildflowers. And this is the kind of big first flush of some of the annual seeds, like the corn cockles and marigolds, that sort of thing. And then it sort of settles down a bit with some of the more perennial wildflowers like oxeye daisy and birdsfoot trefoil. So another bank that we've been doing. This is another school called Applegarth School in New Addington, and it's a chalk bank. Again, similar sort of principle where we're using the subsoil, scraping up the subsoil to form the base of the bank, and then covering that with a good layer of chalk. So it's 20 mil to dust. So you need that quite sort of fine material within the chalk to make sure you've got fine material for the seeds to establish in and the roots to get into as well. But the flat area in front, we've sort of exposed the subsoil underneath, so that the layer of chalk doesn't need to be so thick on that flat area. And this will be fantastic for things like kidney vetch and horseshoe vetch to get established amongst those other plants, and obviously a great educational resource for the school and the kids to have in there in a sort of neglected corner of their playing field. So all this hard work, hopefully in a few years' time, should look a bit more like this picture, which was taken from Dorothy Stringer School in Brighton. And this was first established back in 2007. Again, it was just a plain amenity grassland bank with no biodiversity interest at all, really. And they did some work to expose the sort of chalky subsoil they have there naturally. And this picture, I think, is probably about 3 or 4 years after that was created. And you can see the kind of abundance of wildflowers there, which then go on to support a wealth of biodiversity. And some of these butterfly species that came in and sort of colonized over a period of time. So I think over 10 years, it now supports this site about 30 species of butterfly, which is pretty remarkable for new habitat. So yeah, on the top left there, we've got common blue, for example, then small copper, green hair streak. This is the small blue and the chalk-gill blue butterfly. So these are all species, amongst others, that we're expecting to benefit from the project in Croydon with similar results. So that was sort of my area that I've been primarily focused on, but just to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the other elements of the work that I've talked about. So yes, this is sort of just some images to illustrate some of the habitat restoration work that's going on some of the nature reserves. And this is Anna on the left, our reserves officer, working at Dollopers Hill Nature Reserve in Old Coulsdon, which is a lovely little sort of woodland and downland site. It's got chalk grassland glades that we're looking to extend and connect those glades to hopefully boost the biodiversity and the butterfly numbers on that site. And again, this core site will act as a enabler for butterflies spreading into wider green spaces. On the right is a shot from Chapel Bank Nature Reserve, where they have had issues with scrub invasion, haven't been able to graze the site in the way that they wanted to, and so they have done some more extensive work getting diggers in to scrape back that topsoil and remove some of that scrub that's given them such a problem, and seed some of those sites. But some areas would also be left for natural colonisation, because you have got a good seed bank on some of these sites where you can see what plants will come up naturally. We do regular volunteer days, so we have, I think it's 3 days a week when we can, obviously not during lockdown, and then some weekend days as well. We've recruited 20 new volunteers and have about 40 regular volunteers. This is on the right is an image from Dollopers Hill, where we're connecting up a couple of glades, and you can see we're sort of working through some of the woodland areas to create that connection. And as well as some of the usual kind of scrub bashing that volunteer groups do, this is some hedge laying they've been getting up to on the left-hand side there, and you can see the result of that work, which is a nice sort of constructive project at West Kent Golf Course, the site that I mentioned earlier, with some hedge laying there, and then other sort of projects like restoring and repairing fences. We have a program of community engagement, so a lot of different nature-based events. So you can see some craft type events, working with people in the community on the top right there. Guided walks that we've done, getting people out onto the sites, onto these nature reserves. On the bottom there, working with different schools, again getting schools out into their local area to come and see what's on their doorstep. And this kind of illustrates how we're looking to go about it in terms of these sites. This is Hutchinson's Bank in the middle here, these fields and scrub area, and the kind of proximity of New Addington on the left-hand side here. It's very much alongside the sites, but with this scrub of belt of trees, actually a lot of people don't even realise this fantastic site which supports over 40 butterfly species is right on their doorstep. So that's an important part of the project, to engage with some of these communities, and we've held events, within in the town centre, for example, talking to people about the project, and then walking down onto the site with people to get them better connected with what's on their doorstep. And that includes local schools as well. So this is a quote from Jo Hussey from Fairchild School, which is just nearby. So she's saying, since working Brilliant Butterflies, our local environment has really opened up to our children during a period when appreciating nature on your doorstep has never been more important. So we're actually, I showed a shot earlier actually of a butterfly bank that we created within their grounds, and that kind of illustrates how we want to get nature from the nature reserves into green spaces, into public spaces, so that people can enjoy it within those spaces as well, and shouldn't have to just rely or visit nature reserves to see different butterfly species. We're looking to improve the pedestrian access as well from New Addington onto this particular site. So you can see currently on the left, this is the current pedestrian access. Isn't particularly welcoming, with sort of redundant fence posts. It's a bit overgrown, the signage isn't that great. So we're doing a project this year to kind of smarten that up and improve the signage. And this is just as you come down onto the nature reserve, the image on the right, which is very much overgrown, and yeah, I mean, some of this is going to be good for breeding birds, and we'll keep some of it, but we want to create a butterfly bank, and so we're probably bringing in some chalk to create a butterfly bank in this glade, which should be a much nicer kind of welcome, and improve the biodiversity in this part of the nature reserve. So the environmental DNA work that the Natural History Museum is doing, just to sort of tell you a little bit about that. So on the top right, this is just some of the sampling that we've been doing across some of the nature reserves. So this is called a malaise trap, which samples flying insects, and they're collected in the kind of white bottle in alcohol solution. And that sample can then be extracted and sequenced in terms of the DNA that it's collected from those invertebrates. And then this is it's a pitfall trap to collect a sample of ground-dwelling invertebrates. So they can go back to the lab and extract the DNA from those samples, and literally we're getting thousands of different species identified, or groups of species identified. So we're building up quite a detailed picture of the ecosystem and the health of the environment, and also help with a kind of DNA reference library that they're slowly building up for ecosystems across the country. So it's quite pioneering work, because I mean, one of the reasons is it's just much quicker than traditional invertebrate sampling, where you would want to identify each different species by, under a microscope with the different keys and working through individual samples, whereas this is much quicker and much more detailed. We are promoting and wanting to get people involved in surveying, and a lot of the events encouraging people to get down onto their local green space and their local nature reserves, and showing people these sites and some of the wildflowers and butterflies, getting the old butterfly nets out so that we can get a good up-close view of some of these species, to inspire people, inspire the next generation to get involved in helping to monitor and record some of these sites, just to encourage people to care for their local environment and protect it for future generations, really. And we call it the big bug hunts, which is really kind of building on a lot of the excellent monitoring and recording methods that Butterfly Conservation and others have established. So Big Butterfly Count is one of those that you may have heard of, which is a very simple and easy way to record butterflies on a smartphone. And this identification guide you can see here is taken from our kind of green green space brilliant butterflies recording leaflet. And yes, we'll be running a number of different identification and recording workshops throughout the project area over this spring and summer. With any luck, we unfortunately weren't able to do that last year due to COVID. But yeah, if that's something of interest, then keep an eye out. We'll be promoting different workshops over the spring and summer to encourage. You know, ideally, we'd like to get monthly iRecord surveys of butterflies in local green spaces and where we're creating new habitat, so that we can monitor how populations change. And Natural History Museum are also doing a Grassland Heroes training program, they're calling it, doing invertebrate surveying, and they will offer some training for those that are interested in doing invertebrate surveys of grassland habitats. So where have we got to date so far on the project? We've restored about 20 hectares of habitat across those core nature reserves. We've already created 17 new habitats across the project area, across South Croydon and Bromley. We've done over 1,000 volunteer hours out on different sites. We've engaged 1,873 people on different events. We've done the eDNA baseline surveys that are will be continuing this coming year. We've scoped out 54 sites for new habitat. Currently in lockdown, we are limited, obviously, in what we can do, particularly in terms of the engagement side of things. But case in point, we're here, obviously, online delivering an event, and our engagement team have got a series of weekly Wild Wednesday, all sorts of different events like quizzes and that sort of thing going on. Yes, I'm primarily planning 18 new habitats, so working with different landowners, primarily Croydon and Bromley councils, to deliver new habitats in some of those green spaces across the boroughs. We're keeping up our presence on social media, and also we have regular newsletters to different to volunteers and participants. So again, if that's something you're interested in keeping track of, we have regular newsletters that go out. And on the final slides now, yeah, just to really kind of illustrate kind of where we got to and where we're heading to on this map. The red markers indicate the nature reserves, and all the other markers are either new habitat that's been created or is being planned to be delivered this coming year. So hopefully you can see there's a pretty good spread of sites that kind of complement the core nature reserves, and taken as a whole, looking to deliver this nature recovery network to boost insect and butterfly populations across the area. And that brings me to the end. So thank you for listening. And